Chinese Grandmaster Ding Liren could be the least likely world chess champion ever. Of course, he still needs to beat Ian Nepomniachtchi in their upcoming match, but that would be the last of many challenges that Ding has faced. But Ding has never been one to shy away from challenges unless that challenge is an interview with woman Grandmaster Dina Belenkaya.
All right, thank you so much and good luck for tomorrow. All right, Ding. Thanks so much. That was a tough game and see you soon.
But let's take a look at Ding's path to the World Championship match. All his troubles started with a problem that everyone in the world is familiar with: COVID-19. Ding Liren's home country of China implemented super stringent travel restrictions, which made it near impossible for Ding to play in international chess tournaments. And this is even after the rest of the world started to open up and start hosting tournaments again. So why is this such a challenge? Because to play for the World Championship title, you need to win the candidates tournament. And to play in the candidates tournament, you need to qualify by playing in these international events. Here are the 8 different ways you can qualify for the candidates, and you can see that Ding qualified by being the highest FIDE rated player, but that did not even exist as a path. Originally, Sergei Karyakin had fulfilled this spot because of his finish in the World Cup, but in late March 2022, FIDE banned Karyakin for his remarks on the war in Ukraine, and this opened the doors for a new spot in the candidates tournament. The highest rated player who had played at least 30 rated games in the last year. Ding Liren had only played 2. That meant that he needed to play 28 classical chess games in a span of 30 days. And that's exactly what he did in 3 events. So let's take a look at one of those games during that 30-day stretch where Ding Liren had 13 wins, 15 draws, and 0 losses. This man was on a mission to prove he's just as sharp as ever, even though he hasn't been playing as much over the board. And after he plays this interesting idea in the King's Indian of b4, typically the pawns are on c4, d4, and e4, he says, okay, no, I'm going to play b4, a little bit of an offbeat approach, and by the time he plays bishop a3, it's a complete novelty, not even in the master database. And you might be wondering, like, Ding, what are you doing? Sure, maybe you x-rayed this rook on f8, but after the opponent plays c5, like, you collectively played connect 4, like, this bishop is the saddest bishop I've ever seen. But Ding's like, whatever, I'll just centralize my rook and take on c5, and eventually, as I make progress in the center, my opponent's going to want to take on d4. And when they do, bishop d6. And at this point, Ding Liren was up more than 30 minutes on the clock because his opponent was struggling so much with the opening ideas. With a slight advantage, he has to figure out how to keep that advantage. His opponent undermines the bishop, but the bishop still stays there for now. And in this position, there's only one move to keep the advantage he's gotten from the opening. This queen-bishop battery can be very strong. The idea is that if this knight ever moves, well, there's mate in 1 on g2. So of course, Ding Liren says, prophylactic move, bishop f1, protecting that pawn. And now that the knight's able to move, the knight jumps forward, hitting all these squares, and importantly, hitting the queen. So the queen moves off of this idea of the battery. And now that the queen's not on this diagonal anymore, well, the queen just comes out, and then the bishop comes out, because the bishop's no longer tied to g2. And white is asking black, what are you going to do? Are you going to allow me to damage your structure? Okay, be my guest. I will gladly damage your structure. And Ding's like, who the heck is protecting your king? I'm going to fast forward through a lot more of these moves because we do have a lot of highlights to get to. But long story short, what ends up happening is that as we transition to an endgame, we get to this point where Ding's opponent is able to offer a queen trade. And Ding is so savage, he's like, no, why would I go for an endgame that is probably pretty drawish? And then Ding's opponent says, okay, well then I want to get my triple dagger burger, and what are you going to do with that? Ding says, I want my side of a rook infiltration, and I'm going to have a super active rook. Ding's opponent in this position finds the most insane move, queen takes e1. Top engine move, and the whole idea is that after you temporarily sacrifice your queen, remember that triple decker? Well, it actually comes in handy because now rook c1 pins the queen to the king. So takes, and we get to this endgame. Several moves later, I'm going to fast forward yet again, but long story short, okay, Ding has this moment where he has to either take or push. I'm not going to lie, if I'm playing this game, I'm probably taking and then taking. But Ding says, no, I want to push f4, allowing your pawn to get to the e3 square, 2 squares away from promotion. And if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, Ding is further than 2 squares from promotion. So it's like, what are you doing? Well, he gives a check, he pushes his pawn, but so does black. And actually, going this close to promoting is a mistake. Liren begins to outclass his grandmaster opponent. F6 check. King moves out of the way. Rook d6, allowing the pawn to promote. Can you imagine looking at this position and being like, yeah, white's winning? Well, that's what Liren thought. After rook check, king moves, he shuffles a couple more times and then plays rook g7 check. He has perfect piece coordination because the rook is protected by the pawn and the knight covers this square and delivers the check. There's only one square possible, and that is susceptible to another check and then another check. Why is this a check? Because there's a discovery on the king by the rook after the pawn gets out of the way. So you get a queen and you get to keep the tempo. Because, for example, if this wasn't check and it's black's turn, it's actually really dangerous for white. But very importantly, now Ding just starts hunting the king around, and after the bishop blocks, Ding is able to calculate rook takes c6. Are you kidding me? Knight check. Okay, you can't take with the queen, but what about this? Queen b7, okay. In this position, black resigned. Because if you take this knight, Ding grabs his skewers and he gives you a check here. You move out of the way and you lose your queen. Alternatively, if you really want to be stubborn about it, you're just going to get checked into oblivion and honestly, probably checkmated after this, and mate. So Liren completes his 28 extra games to get to a total of 30 rated games, and he is in to the candidates tournament. Upon arriving to Madrid, he plays Ian Nepomniachtchi in the first round. Yes, that's the same Nepo that he's going to have to play in the World Championship title match. They didn't know that at the time, but here Ding is not off to a hot start after he goes grabbing all these extra pawns, but his king is just not safe. After the pawn takes, he tries to bring his knight back, but he's wasting all this time that he needs to devote more resources to defending his king. After the pawn pushes, this bishop is, for the lack of a better word, just screwed. So he takes, and after the bishop's gone, he takes the rook with check, and he's hoping to make a loop for his king this way. But by doing so, he picked up a rook, he loses a rook. And more importantly, he also lost the bishop. So he's down material and his king is insanely unsafe. And in this position, Nepo was more than happy to give even more material to Ding after bishop h3 check. An insane move because when you take that bishop, well, guess what? The queen comes back and you have nowhere to go. You have to go king g4 and then h5 check. You go king g5 and queen h3. How can you defend all these different squares around the king? Checkmate is imminent everywhere. The only thing left to do is just sacrifice all your pieces, but there's checkmate here, there's checkmate here. It's GG. Now, how does Ding respond to this? Well, what he does is he swaps out his chair for a different chair. Apparently, this is a tournament tradition where Liren always requests like a smaller chair. For whatever reason, he's not comfortable in the super comfy office/gaming chairs. He wants like a normal plain chair. He's all about the anti-luxury play. Honestly, respect. And after that, he starts cleaning house. He beats the likes of Jan Krzysztof Duda. He beats Richard Rapport. And even most impressively, he beats former number 2 player in the world, Fabiano Caruana. And now we fast forward to round 14, the last game of the candidates tournament, and Liren is only half point behind Hikaru Nakamura. That means that Hikaru just needs a draw, and Hikaru will secure second place. But at this time, Magnus had not announced that he was officially not defending his world championship title, so no one knew if second place mattered or not. It was just this broad, maybe this mystical event will happen, but no one at the time really believed that Magnus was going to decline to defend. So with that being said, what do you do if you're Hikaru? Do you just go for the draw anyway because that secures second place? That seems logical, and if you're trying to do that, you probably want to just trade all your pieces off and go like this and have a much easier endgame to try and slowly just trade everything down. Like the pawn structure is quite symmetrical, and you shake hands and you go home. But for some reason, Hikaru plays bishop d8, and this is a grave mistake because it allows the white rook to stay in black's territory, limiting black's activity. And more importantly, who knows what that rook's going to do in the future? Hint, hint. Okay, the knight jumps forward, and now, yes, we are giving up this pawn. They don't even take, because I think if you take, then it's really bad. You get forked by a king. That's just embarrassing. Don't do that. Okay, Hikaru obviously sees that, doesn't go for it. Knight e5 instead. Knight jumps forward. f3 check. King moves forward. Knight goes to try and attack the a pawn. Now white's just like, let's just trade everything down. But Hikaru's again saying, no, let's not trade things down. I'm going to win this a pawn. After the f pawn drops, now Hikaru's got a pawn, but you can't win the other pawn just yet because of this bishop. So a couple moves later, Hikaru's like, well, what if I get my bishop back to be more active this way? Okay, you do that, but Ding's actually going to gobble up your a pawn. You still can't win this b pawn, and you got to be extra careful because now after the bishop goes to c3, both players start playing this little bit of cat and mouse game, but ultimately when the knight jumps back, bishop needs to move. But you have to be very careful where it goes because Hikaru places on b2, and that bishop is now officially trapped. Rook a2, bishop c1, rook follows the bishop, bishop goes back to a3, and bishop moves, but the knight's still doing its job, it's forcing the bishop to stay there, and here Hikaru resigns. Liren successfully squeezes the win out of Hikaru in this position, effectively leapfrogging him into second place. And at the end of the tournament, still nobody knew if Magnus was going to defend his title or not, but then Magnus broke the news. He was stepping down, he was not going to defend his title, and that is how we got to the point today where Ian Nepomniachtchi versus Liren is the heavyweight battle that we are going to see for the Classical World Chess Championship title. The first game starts on April 9th, 2023 in Astana, Kazakhstan. If you enjoyed this video, let me know if you want to hear more stories from me about pro chess players. For example, like this one over here. And happy learning, everyone.